Welcome back. I'm so excited for my next guest. Do you know who Prince is? Remember, unfortunately, he died of a fentanyl drug overdose, I believe. I know he had a lot of narcotics in his system, and I believe it was fentanyl overdose. But, anyways, I had enjoyed his music, and I remember a long time ago in the 80s, he was talking about chemtrails. And I never believed it. I never thought, I don't understand why anybody would want to put chemicals purposely in the air. But Peter Kirby, who's a world renowned independent researcher, investigative author, and an activist specializing especially in deep dives of suppressed or controversial issues. His groundbreaking work on geoengineering and weather modification has produced his new book, Chemtrails Exposed, a New Manhattan Project. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Maria.
What is chemtrails?
Well, they're plural, but they are what the establishment passes off as contrails. They're calling chemtrails contrails and contrails chemtrails, believe it or not, in this upside down world we live in. What chemtrails are adulterated exhaust, usually coming from the engine area of large jet aircraft flying high in the sky. They're not always coming from the engine, so that gives you a clue as to they're not contrails at all. They're not something. See, what a condensation trail is, it's a amalgamation of two words: condensation and trail. So you're looking at a plane high in the sky on a cold day. It has to be cold, and it's much colder up there than it is on the ground. But if it's cold on the ground and you see a plane high in the sky, and it's not part of this chemtrail operations that I write about so much. If the jet fuel is unadulterated and there's enough humidity in the atmosphere, then you get a contrail. Okay, I know what a contrail looks like because I'm old enough to remember actual contrails. When I was a child, I saw actual contrails, and I remember them, and they were very short tails. They appeared as very short tails after a plane that would disappear in under 5 seconds and be maybe 20 lengths of the plane. It'd disappear very quickly. And now we just see, things coming out of planes, lines coming out of planes that initially kind of look like they might be a contrail, but they stretch from horizon to horizon and just sort of stay there and, spread out and form cloud cover over the course of hours. So this is obviously particulate matter. And, like I was starting to say there, we have a lot of video footage of these these emissions coming from jet aircraft high in the sky, and we have close-up images of these planes. And the stuff that's coming out of the planes, these lines, are not coming from the engines. They're coming from parts of the plane that don't have an engine. So how could it be a contrail? I mean, we have tons and tons of video footage of this. I mean, we have video footage of secondary dispersions where, there's what looks like the contrails, actually chemtrails, coming out of the engine area of a plane, that they're leaving large lines over the sky. And then you have a close-up shot of a secondary dispersion turning off and on coming out of the tail. Sometimes it'll be there, sometimes it won't. And other times you see planes flying along that have a big long trail behind them, and then it suddenly stops very abruptly. And then the plane will go on for a little while, and then it'll suddenly start again. So we can assume that they're not turning the engines on and off. and then, other just sort of prima facie observations you can make are things such as one day you'll see the sky just completely full of lines all over the place, crisscrossing tic-tac-toes, X's all over the place. And then the next day there'll be nothing, even though the weather is basically identical as the previous day. So how does that work? You see, there's certain things that the naysayers just can't explain away. And I've actually had a conversation with somebody who is what I would call a boss troll on the other side of this thing. And he couldn't answer the deal about the line stopping and starting. He had explanations for everything else, but he says, no, I just can't explain that. So there actually might, you'd think that someone might think, hey, maybe there's something there and actually look into it. Of course, the guy that I was talking to, who will not be named, had created this whole world of BS in order to try to explain it away. But of course, none of it holds water.
Peter, this is really scary when you think about it. What would be the purpose? Because if I'm understanding this correctly, the airlines would have to be involved in this, right? Or why would anybody want to have chemicals in the air? What is the purpose of it?
Yeah, I have a whole chapter in my book called Motives. And there's, essentially one of the major things going on here is weather modification. I think that there's other things going on, and I have a chapter in my book called Other Agendas, because when you have something this big, and I'm calling it the biggest scientific effort in history because it is, you have different motivations going into it, a lot of different motivations. What I go over in the book is, financial markets that rise and fall with the weather, because, I think we've come to a consensus that this is weather modification. So there's a lot of motives for weather modification. And, you need water for cities, you need water for agriculture. A lot of it has to do with the redistribution of atmospheric water. And, but then, you can actually, with this, what I'm calling the New Manhattan Project, you can actually control a whole range of geophysical conditions that you can actually bet on in different financial markets. And I cover that extensively in the book. There's more, if you want to hear more motives.
Oh my God. Peter, can it work the opposite way? Like, I just recently learned that we're doing weather modification, that some states literally pay for this kind of service, because of drought or other things. And I guess the technology's been there. Oh, go ahead, sir.
But Dr. Maria, I think I know what you're about to say, but was there something else that you wanted to tack on at the end there? Because my thing is, my problem is we're getting stuck on the cloud seeding industry too much. What I'm talking about in my book is not the cloud seeding industry. Okay, the cloud seeding industry is tinker toy stuff. This is boring stuff. This is stuff that was legislated on a state-to-state basis in the late 1940s. It's been legal to modify the weather with silver iodide and probably other things, and it's very easy to get permits for all this. And they do it for mostly increasing precipitation, so they do it in the West mostly, which needs water. The eastern half of the country doesn't generally need water; they usually have too much water. But,
right. Well, I was going to start with that, but say, because you sparked my thinking when you said there could be money, right? The money's behind everything, and people, whether they're betting on it, could they have done the opposite as well? Remember, we went through a craze about global warming, and was so much government money spent on tackling this. Is that something that these chemtrails could have done?
Yeah, they're causing global warming is what they're doing. They're causing regional warming by spraying particulate matter into the upper troposphere, lower stratosphere. And see, when you do that, it causes heat to be trapped. Anybody who's spent any time outdoors, you don't have to be like super outdoorsy or anything, but if you know anything about outdoors, the coldest days are the days where there are no clouds, because the heat is not held in. When there are clouds, it holds heat in. And so, there's this whole, and then of course we got to get into the geoengineers, who say that we're going to save the earth from global warming by spraying you with stuff out of planes. If it gets really bad, we might have to do this. When, of course, the whole premise of their assertion is wrong on more than one count. First of all, theory of man-made global warming is false. Second of all, when you spray things out of planes, you don't make things cooler, you make things hotter. So, these are the geoengineers. These are the great world-conquering scientists that have, been propounding this for decades and decades. They were really vocal about 20 years ago when everybody was asleep. But I haven't been hearing too much from them lately, the geoengineers. They haven't really dared to raise their head since people have been talking about this so much. I haven't heard a peep out of David Keith or Ken Caldeira or Alan Robach or any of the rest of them. They used to be pumping out their propaganda on a weekly basis. Now you'd be hard pressed to find anything that any of them have said recently. So I find that kind of interesting.
Correct about that. Yeah, it seems to have been really silent from their end. But how do you explain commercial planes? Is the airline industry? Is it the CEOs? Are the pilots are aware of this? Like, how do you explain commercial airlines releasing chemtrails?
The commercial airlines do not own the aircraft. They lease the aircraft.
From
Boeing.
Boeing, okay.
And then who does Boeing work for? Who's Boeing's primary customer?
The U.S. government.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they just tell them what to do. I mean, they got them under their thumb. You know what I mean? They're their biggest account. If the Department of Defense says, we need you to make this plane available to us for a couple weeks or a month or something, we need it over here at this facility. You get that plane there, and you take it out of service for 2 weeks or a month or whatever it is. You know why? Because they're paying your bills. The Department of Defense or Department of War has always been Boeing's number one customer. Always. It goes way back. These people have been working for the federal government. They don't even because we think, our experience of life is getting on a plane and going somewhere. So we think that's Boeing's business. You know what I mean? Oh, they make the planes that we get on and we go places. But the military business is way bigger. And it goes, I don't know if it's way bigger today, but it goes way back a lot further than commercial and deeper. It has much deeper roots into the aviation industry than commercial passenger aircraft does. Military has always been very interested in aircraft and dominating space and all this kind of stuff. And anyway, so when NASA was created in 1958, that was a big deal. It really supercharged the whole scene. But I'm working on right now. I am under the impression, and I'm going to continue to assert this, that all commercial aircraft, jet aircraft, commercial and passenger and freight, that kind of stuff, all the airlines and everything, all of those planes can be remotely controlled. They deny it. And if you ask AI, it'll say, no, they can't be controlled. This is off the shelf standardized technology that has been going on for a long time. I know where it came from. It's called from inertial guidance. And I'm actually reading a book about the guy who, I just started reading it today, about the guy who started all that. His name was Stark Draper. William Stark Draper. I just started reading the book, but in 1953, he rode in a plane from the East Coast to the West Coast, from the Boston area to Los Angeles, that was completely remotely controlled in 1953. So where do you think we are now with these technologies? It's just off the shelf stuff that you just put in the plane, and it's no big deal. You know what I mean? So what I'm getting at is, what could happen is, the Department of Defense could tell any of these airlines or freight liners or whatever, they could just say, just don't have anybody in the plane at that time. We need, everything, just the plane sitting on the tarmac, not restrained or anything like that. And they could remotely control it out of the aircraft, out of the airport. And it could be, I think they actually call it zombie mode, if I'm not mistaken. And it could be remotely controlled and flown over to the destination where they need it, where they install stuff that can, or put more chemtrail spray in it, or, rejigger it if it's an older aircraft that doesn't have the spraying capabilities. Because you remember back in, I think it was around 2005, maybe about 20 years ago. And this is speculation. The book is like hardcore evidence, just like science history from top to bottom. But I like to speculate in interviews and things. There's a little bit of speculation, but I let you know in the book when I'm speculating a little bit. And other people are saying this too. Back in around 2005, do you remember when the airlines all said, "Oh, you have to pay to check your bags now"? Because So what that obviously did, when they had people starting to pay for checking their bags, well, then it reduced the number of bags that they have to put on the plane, right? Because now you got to pay for it. So there's probably about less than half of what they used to have. So you can use that extra space to put chemtrail spray in the plane, can't you? I'm thinking that
Hmm.
that's what that was all about. I never really heard any explanation as to why they're charging you now. It's like all of the airlines did it all of a sudden. I mean, you used to
Well,
go
the
to,
thought was fuel and the weight. They needed more fuel. I guess maybe I'm gullible. But Peter, I'm just curious.
I guess.
Personally, have you always had a very curious mind?
Yeah, I mean, I don't consider myself out of the ordinary. I think everybody has a curious mind. It's just not everybody pursues their curiosities. You know what I mean?
Mm.
I'm just willing to forsake like everything other than what I want to do in life. You know what I mean? And I just, I'm broke, and I have very few friends, and the money's not coming in. But I'm successful in at least in the public's eye. You know what I mean? Like if people have heard of me, they see me like doing these things, and I think this is how you get things started. But I don't recommend it. You know what I mean? Like, give it to let Dr. Maria and me handle this. Everybody out there, but no, I mean,
Yeah, I
it's
was
it's not
thinking
a tough
that, Peter,
question because it's been
that
rough.
here you're probably uncovering things. The people who don't want you looking into this might be attacking you, but in 5 years, 10 years down the road, it'll all be laid out truth how truthful your book is. And I was curious about that as well, Peter. Have you received pushback, especially from anybody in the government, as you're looking and researching chemtrails?
Well, yeah. I mean, they do it in a kind of a subtle way these days. It's not so
Mhm.
much breaking your kneecaps anymore. It's more like just,
Yeah.
isolating you socially and making
Mm.
sure that your material doesn't go viral, and just keeping a cap on what you're doing. I did have like a little bit of direct interaction. It was a little bit scary at first because my first bone, I exposed the California Air Resources Board back in 2009. Yeah, 2009. And after I did that, I'll tell the story in just a second, but after I did that, I had like one of their people calling me, just kind of feeling me out or something. And I was getting the impression that they really did not like what I just did there. And what I did was, this was very early on when I realized that we were being sprayed. I ended up getting the best piece of evidence ever for this thing. To this day, it's still the best piece of evidence ever. What happened was, when I realized that we were being sprayed, I was here in California, and I said to myself, well, the California, I'm here in this communist state, and they do absolutely everything. So, they're most probably monitoring the air for toxins, right? So I went online and I found something called, not all states do, but California does, because they have enough money to, and the government is big enough. Anyway, I got on the California Air Resources Board website. I had never heard of them before, but I found that they were monitoring toxins. And they had posted on their website, you could generate these charts with a simple set of commands. And these charts showed aluminum and barium rising year over year, from what I learned later was the beginning of the domestic large-scale spraying operations in 1996. So just from
Mm.
like 1996 to 2002, you saw amounts of atmospheric aluminum and barium on a statewide average on two separate charts, going up and up and
You
up.
know,
And
you know how
barium
many
was,
neurological problems, including Alzheimer's, are linked to aluminum levels? Like, this is really scary. Is some of the purpose to make us sick?
well, yeah. I mean, that's been a dynamic going on for a long time. But I took screenshots of those and I publicized it. That's how I made my first bone. And then it was only later I realized like how devastating that information was. But yeah, there's there's a whole dynamic in society of that going on. I'm not an expert on Bill Gates's past. I've read that book Hard Drive, which of course revealed nothing to me. But I have been told that he really got rich off of creating viruses and then having people, have to pay for something that they had to download to save them from the virus.
Mm.
I've heard this, but then there's many examples of these kinds of things where or the classic example is some guy who's running a windshield repair shop puts up a billboard, and there's a lot of cars down below that can see the billboard from where the car is, and then he goes and smashes all the windshields on all the cars, right? So then with a hammer. So then when the people get back to the car, they see their smashed windshield, and then they say, "Oh, damn, I need a new windshield." And then they look up at the billboard, and it says, "Get your new windshield here, limited time special, act now." But see that, and then people say that about big pharma as well.
Exactly. That big pharma is investing in turbo cancer centers because mRNA injections, we've seen it in healthcare, myocarditis, cardiac issues, neurological issues, turbo cancers, and it's the same people investing in the turbo cancers. It makes it so, Peter, you don't want to go out. You just want to close yourself off to the world because
don't do that, Dr. Maria. But I think we can bring it full circle a little bit here because it ties into your motives thing. And I said that there's these well-defined motives for weather and war and financial markets and things like that. But I had an epiphany about this recently, and this ties into what we were just talking about. What I think they're doing with these spraying programs is I think they're creating demand for their synthetic world. So they're wrecking the natural world because we know that that's what these sprays do. They just wreck everything. And then the UVB and the UVC, is even worse. Really, the UVB and the UVC is the worst part of it, really. Because the sprays wreck everything. They wreck a lot. It's really the UV and the UVB and the UVC that wrecks everything. And so you have this dynamic going on where everything is being wrecked, where the natural world is being destroyed. Well, doesn't that create, and they've been open about it, doesn't that create demand for big business to come in and say, oh, look, the world is all messed up. And it's because of global warming. But here we have the cure. We have fake trees. We can modify plants genetically. We can modify you genetically. We have all these different pills that you can take to save you and make you better, even though as the world is falling apart all around you. Just take our synthetic world and all our corporate products that are designed to fill this gap that we just created, this gaping hole in nature that we just created. Now we're coming out with products that will fill that gap. It's that's what I really think that they're doing. And and here's another epiphany that I've had recently that I've been talking about. I think big tech is the head of the snake. They're the ones coming out with all this synthetic world stuff, right? So this is creating demand. They're the ones covering it up in the new media, right, on the internet.
Right.
Big tech is just they've been covering this thing up as much as they can. You know why?
They control everything, censor any kind, promote what they want to promote. You're right about that. Big tech.
I've done a lot of research into things like game theory and the history of computing and things. And what I think they're running against us is a malevolent quantum computer, artificial intelligence that's been telling them what to do this whole time. That's where this stream of BS that we've been subjected to for at least 10 years now, out just in your face gaslighting and stonewalling for like 10 years. And, you got to wonder, where are they getting this stuff from? This is totally insane. How do these people come up with these talking points? It used to come from the CIA. They used to have actual guys that thought up all these diabolical talking points to try to cover up the establishment's crimes. But now I think they just go to their computer and ask it, and they have way better AI than anything you and I are looking at. We're talking about 30 years ahead. And if you know about quantum computers, they are, you might as well say that they're infinite computing power. It's not a stretch to say that it's just infinite computing power, because just one of these highly functioning quantum computers could absolutely run everything in the world. And I think this quantum computer, this secret, malevolent quantum computer, artificial intelligence, is running what I call the New Manhattan Project. In other words, the spraying programs and everything else that it can.
Well, Peter, I have to end this segment now, but your book sounds fascinating. I haven't read it, but I will. Chemtrails, the New Manhattan Project, Peter A. Kirby. How do you get it? Skyhorse Publishing, correct? Can you get this on Amazon as well?
Oh yeah, it's on Amazon. That's probably the best place to get it. Tony works in mysterious ways. I gather that he's finding other avenues to sell the book, but I guess I won't see that until I see my first royalty check, which is not going to be till like near the end of the year. But yeah, it's available on Amazon right now, and you can get it. It's listed for 40, but it at different times it does that thing where buy it now and you got a discount. You can get it for like $30 or 32 or something like that. So
fascinating, Peter. I thank you for taking the time to join me today. My mind is going to explode right now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Maria.
Thank you very much.